Hello, I'm that IT guy, and this video is kind of a follow-up to the previous video in regards to how to synchronize Google Calendar with Microsoft Outlook. In this video, however, we will not need Google Calendar. In fact, the idea of this video is to not depend on a third-party online service while still being able to keep calendars synchronized throughout devices, be it Outlook or any software on PCs, Mac, phones, and tablets that can support Caldav calendars. Furthermore, I will also show you how to synchronize address books across these devices. While this walkthrough isn't that complicated, it is time consuming, so grab yourself a cup of coffee and let's start. Note that this process ideally should be done on a machine that will only have this purpose and will be on at all times. But you can go ahead and do it on any PC if you simply want to test it out. The first thing we'll need to do is set a static IP on the local machine. This is to ensure that the local IP will remain the same at all times. Furthermore, if you plan to make this accessible from outside the local network, this will also be needed to further set up a domain name, a no IP-like service, or use of an external IP to access it directly. Click Start, type in CMD and click on Command Prompt. Go ahead and type ipconfig/all. This will bring up your current IP configuration for all of your network adapters. You'll notice that in this machine, we have 192.168.27.128. We're going to go ahead and use this one. Also take note of the DNS server as we'll need it later on. We now need to get to the network connections panel, and once there, right click on the right adapter and click on Properties, followed by selecting Internet Protocol version 4 and clicking on Properties. We'll now choose our own as opposed to having it automated. As mentioned, here I'm going to give the same address, 192.168.27.128. Subnet mask will autofill, and for the default gateway, we'll just copy what the command prompt window says, followed by doing the same for the preferred DNS server. Have in mind that some ISPs will have more than one DNS server, so you can go ahead and fill in the alternative DNS server if you choose to do so. Once we're done, we should make sure we still have a connection to the outside world, so you can do this by typing ping google.com on the command prompt. If we get a reply, we're good to go. For the next step in the process, we're going to need to download some software. So open your browser and go to my website, scrapebyitguy.com. Once there, click on Downloads. You'll need to get Notepad++, both 2012 and 2015 Visual C++ Redistributables, WAMP Server, Outlook Caldav Synchronizer if you hadn't already by following my previous video, and Baikal, Caldav, and Cardav server. Have in mind that none of these tools have a monetary cost associated to them, so if you'd like to donate to them to show your support, please visit their individual websites, which you'll find in each individual download page. Once everything is downloaded, we'll start by installing the Visual Redistributables, as WAMP Server will not work properly without them. If you happen to install WAMP Server before, you'll notice you'll get missing DLL errors. If you install the redistributables after, the errors will disappear, but WAMP will still not work properly and you'll need to reinstall. We'll now need to install Notepad++. The reason we need this is because we'll need to edit a file later on with code in it, and it's not advisable to edit this kind of file with a conventional text editor. Notepad++ will make sure that when we edit this file, formatting will not be affected by resaving it, and it'll work as it's supposed to. At this point, we're ready to install WAMP. Have in mind this usually takes a while to be completed, but I've cut that out of the video. WAMP will ask us what browser we'd like to use, so that's up to you. And it will also ask us what editor we'd like to use, at which point make sure you specify Notepad++ for when we need to edit that file later on. What WAMP Server does is combine in one tool what's commonly known as LAMP, which stands for Linux, Apache, which is the web server, MySQL, which is the database server, and PHP, which allows us to process PHP files on Apache. You may be asking yourself, why do I need this? Well, in order to set up our Caldav and Cardav server, we'll need a web interface where we can control it from. And for this, we need to be able to host it, if you will, on the same machine, so we can access it from another machine or otherwise remotely. That is why we need Apache and PHP. Caldav and Cardav also require a database to store user information, calendars, and contacts, and that's why we need the MySQL part. Don't worry if this is a bit too much. WAMP comes pre-configured with many defaults, so while you may want to experiment, the defaults will just about suit us in regards to this project. Have in mind, however, that WAMP Server is mostly designed as a development environment. So if at the end of this video you decide this is for you and want to deploy the solution in your network, while it'll work just fine and it shouldn't give you any issues, it is recommended you set up a proper web server using either a Windows server or a Linux distribution such as CentOS. On the taskbar, we'll now see the WAMP server icon. It's important we wait until it's green. If it stays in yellow, then something's wrong. The most common cause for this is if you're running Skype or TeamViewer, for example, as these apps use port 80. So try shutting them down completely and then restarting WAMP. Once green, we can open a browser and go to simply localhost. If all went well, the WAMP server page should come up. Any files we want on the server have to go in the www directory within the WAMP install folder. It may be tempting to put this WAMP site into a subfolder, but don't for now, as this requires editing files and it's not something we need for this process. As you can see, doing this will prevent it from loading correctly. Now it's time to get Baikal ready. Go ahead and unzip it, followed by moving the Baikal folder into the www folder within the WAMP server install directory. Once done, go back to your browser and type in localhost/Baikal. We need to get to the HTML folder. However, you'll notice nothing comes up. This is because while I do believe Baikal will work fine in PHP 5.6, which is the default version WAMP Server enables, it doesn't. We can fix this by left-clicking on the WAMP Server icon on the taskbar, and within the PHP options selecting version and then PHP 7. You might need to click on Restart All Services, or you may not. I've seen different computers react differently to version changing. Refresh your browser page and the Baikal setup window will appear. The default options are fine unless the application you ultimately want to access Caldav or Cardav doesn't support digest authentication, in which case you'll need to change this to basic. If you do this, you may also want to consider enabling SSL encryption. Otherwise, access credentials will be stored in simple text. Note that you can do this at any time if you're not sure. Leave it as it is for now. Go ahead and also choose an admin access password. Now we have the database setting. Choose MySQL, as that's what we have in WAMP Server. But before we can move forward, we'll need to create a database and a database user. We need to open phpMyAdmin. Note that depending on settings, clicking on it under the WAMP page may not work, so you can do it manually or go through the icon on the taskbar. The login is root and there is no password. Note that you will want to change this as soon as possible for security and obvious reasons. We will not be using the root account, however, for this. Instead, we will be creating a new MySQL user for our process. So go ahead and click Add User under User Accounts. Choose a username and set localhost under hostname. Remember to also add a password and confirm it, which you'll see I forgot. To make the process easier, we're also going to select Create Database with same name and grant all privileges. Now that we have a new database and a user with the same name with all privileges assigned, we can test it by logging out of root and logging back in with a new user. Once in, we'll see the new database that is, of course, empty. So it's now time to go back to the Baikal setup. Under MySQL host, we'll type in localhost, followed by typing in the details of our database name, username, password, and clicking on Save Changes. If all went well, we'll get a confirmation page indicating so, and we can click on Start Using Baikal, which will take us to the admin directory within the HTML directory in Baikal, where we will log in with our previously specified admin credentials. Once in, we'll see that all three services show as on, and of course, we'll find there's currently no calendar or address book entries. For the purpose of testing outside of the server, for the rest of the video, you'll see me going back and forth through a Windows 10 machine, which acts as a server and client, and a Linux Ubuntu machine, which acts as a client. The first thing we'll want to do from the second machine is test connectivity with the server. For that, we'll open up a browser, and this time we won't go to localhost. Instead, we'll tell the browser to access the server by indicating the IP. If you remember, at the beginning of this video, we specified that the local IP should be 192.168.27.128. We'll see that there is a connection, but we cannot access the server, as it responds with a forbidden message, indicating that we don't have permission to access the root folder on it. Back on the server, we'll need to allow access to connections out of itself. WAMP disables this by default as it's meant to be a development server and therefore normally wouldn't need incoming connections from other machines. We can change this by editing the httpd vhost.conf file, which we can do by clicking on the WAMP server taskbar icon and clicking on Set File within the Apache folder. We'll need to change line 11 within this file to say require all granted. If we wish, we can create an HTTP password file to password protect the root folder within the server, as well as adding empty index.php files within folders that do not have an index file, such as the Baikal folder, to prevent file structures to show on browsers. This is easy enough and optional in this case, so I will move on from that. Once done, save the file and close the editor, followed by restarting all services in WAMP. We're now ready to retest on the second machine, and as you can see, that did the trick, and we can now go to the Baikal folder to make sure that it's working again. Note that as I mentioned earlier, the links on the WAMP page may not work depending on configuration, so you may need to type in the address manually. You'll see that if we go to the HTML folder within Baikal, it'll report that everything is running okay. It's time now to create a Baikal user, so we'll go to Users and Resources, followed by clicking on Add User. These are the details you'll be adding to any application you connect to Caldav and or Cardav from, so make sure you remember them. The system actually comes with a pre-created user, calendar and address book, but for the sake of testing, we'll be creating a new one. Once done, we'll see the user at the top, to the right of which we can find calendars and address book. So let's go ahead and create both a new calendar and a new address book. This is very straightforward, so I'll let you follow the video. Now that our users, calendars, and address book have been created, we can go ahead and open Outlook to test our work. At this point, if you haven't already, due to watching the video on Caldav Synchronizer, you'll need to install said software. Make sure you close Outlook before doing so. If you'd like an explanation on what this is, what features it has, and how to use it, please watch the Synchronize Google Calendar with Outlook video, which you'll find linked on screen right now. We can now go ahead and open synchronization profiles within the Caldav Synchronizer menu on Outlook, followed by adding a new profile. Unlike with synchronizing Google Calendar, this time we'll select generic Caldav Cardav and click OK. On the Outlook folder, I'm going to simply select my default calendar. It is up to you if you'd like to create a separate calendar first. For the DAV URL, we can check our Baikal administration, specifically system settings, where we'll find that the Caldav URL is the project's base URL plus cal.php. So we'll try adding this as the address on Outlook. In our test case, the address would be http localhost/baikal/html/cal.php. This, however, won't always work depending on what application you want to use. Some applications do not support this URL, so you'll need to provide an absolute one. You'll see when I add the rest of the details and click on Test or Discover Settings, we'll choose the test calendar, and following that, Caldav Synchronizer changes the URL for an absolute one, which contains the username and calendar name. This link, however, should work with any other programs, and it's simple enough that you can figure it out regardless of your username or calendar name. As expected, there's no calendar entries, so in order to test, we're going to create a couple of them. Depending on what Caldav Synchronizer settings you've set, you may need to click on Synchronize Now once you're done in order to continue testing, as by default, it will synchronize every X amount of time. Note that if you already have a full calendar or simply some entries, Caldav Synchronizer will not delete these entries. On the contrary, it will send these entries to the server. That said, just in case, it's always good to have a backup, so do that first if that's the case. Now we're on the second machine and we're ready to test on something else aside from the server. In this case, I'm using the Mozilla Thunderbird mail client with the Lightning Calendar plugin. So I will click on File, New and Calendar, followed by choosing On the Network and Next. Here I will specify the calendar is in a Caldav format and add the URL. I've chosen this application as it does not accept the simple URL I mentioned before, so you'll see that I need to add the absolute path URL. Note that some applications will not display an error if you use the shorter URL, but will not actually synchronize, and if they have some sort of error login, they'll simply show a 403 access denied error. If you get this or something similar on your application of choice, you'll know it's because you need to specify the absolute path URL. You'll instantly see that we now have the test entries we created earlier on the server, and that synchronization has worked. But we should make sure that synchronization works both ways. So I'm creating a calendar entry from the second machine to see if this works. Note that, as I mentioned earlier, each application will have different synchronization time settings, so it is likely you will not see items created on one machine instantly on the others. Because of this, and for the sake of testing, I recommend that, if you have the choice, you force synchronization the moment you're ready. We're back on the server and we're ready to see if synchronization worked both ways. And as you can see, our test entry is there. We're going to do one last test to make sure it worked. Once again, we can confirm synchronization worked and is complete. So we're ready to move on to the next step, which is calendar synchronization. This will work differently in terms of testing, as not every application that has Caldav calendar support has an address book functionality or Cardav address book support. So in this case, I will simply show you how to do it in Outlook with Caldav Synchronizer. The steps for these are almost the same as when we added the calendar, the main difference being that the URL will change slightly and we'll have to choose the Contacts Outlook folder instead of the calendar one. Once again, you'll notice that once we click on Test or Discover settings and choose the address book we want, the URL will change and display the full path URL. Have this in mind when using other applications, as they may require you to specify the full path URL instead of the shorter one. We can now go ahead and create a contact. As with the calendar entries, if you already had contacts, these won't be removed. They will be sent to the server. But as recommended, it is best you perform a backup before, just in case. As mentioned earlier, and as you can see, depending on your synchronization settings, content will be sent to the server every X amount of time and not necessarily the second you create it. So, for the sake of testing, I'm going to force synchronization on Outlook. Now that I've forced synchronization, we'll see on the Baikal administration panel that there is now one contact on the server, which is the one we created. With this, we conclude this tutorial. You now have a local server that hosts your calendar and address books across devices in your local network without the need of a third-party service, such as Google Calendar or Microsoft Exchange server. If you want to make the server accessible from outside your local network, the only change is obtaining a full static IP, a no IP-like service, or a domain name, and configuring your server accordingly. I will not go into detail on how to do this, as there are plenty of guides out there. Remember that if you wish to do this, it may be advisable to set up a proper server in Windows Server or a Linux server distribution, such as CentOS. If this is something you'd be interested in seeing, or perhaps how to set this up in a device such as the Raspberry Pi, as it will make it an ideal device due to its low power consumption, considering the server would have to be on 24/7, please let me know in the comments and I will definitely look into making a video on this. I'd like to thank some of the commenters on the previous video, as it's because of them that I had the idea of looking into this process and seeing if it would work, followed by creating the actual video. I'd also like to thank the developers on the variety of software we've been using, especially the developers behind Outlook Caldav Synchronizer. As without all of these developers, we will not be able to set this up in a way where it has no monetary implications and is mostly open source or under the GPL license. Furthermore, and as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, you'll find individual links to their websites in each individual download page within scrapebyitguy.com if you'd like to support them by donating something. Well, that's it from me. I hope you liked the video, and if you did, please click like. And of course, remember to subscribe for future walkthroughs, and feel free to ask questions about this or suggest other topics for future walkthroughs. That IT Guy out.